So the domain is just a list of all those x's. So Victoria was right, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And how about the range?
You don't put the parentheses.
Yeah, you don't. It's okay if you don't draw the fancy brackets there. So 2, 7, 12, and 17. If something appears more than once, you do not write it more than once. Okay, so if 3 showed up again, we don't need to write it again. Okay, we just make a list of all of them, all the different ones that are used. In this case, is this a function? Yes. How do we know?
Because there is no repeat number.
No repeat numbers where?
On the X.
Right. Okay, yes, there are no repeats in the x. Or I could say all of the x's are different. So if I added this point, is it still a function?
No.
Yes.
Yes. That would still be a function. What if I added this point?
No.
No. And what would your reason be to tell me why it's not a function?
Because the X, 3.
Because 3 repeats in the domain, or because 3, there's 2, right? And it's paired with a different thing, all right? So when we say that it doesn't repeat, remember that has to do with the x's. So no repeats in the x, or all of the x's are different. Every member of the domain has only one pair in the range. Many ways we could say that. And then our next question, we have a mapping diagram. And again, we are asked if it is a function. So please notice, as I tried to model, but now I have taken it away, I did not just say no or just say yes. And that the directions actually say explain why or why not in a complete sentence. I am quite aware that I am not an English teacher, but even I know that a complete sentence starts with a capital letter, not like texting, starts with a capital letter. I can't even text without starting with a capital letter. Anyway, ends with a period, and needs to have like a subject and a verb. So I don't need a book, please. But, just make an effort, all right? So here, is it a function? No. No, it is not a function. And why is it not a function? Okay, so I could say that, but when I look at it, it doesn't look like it repeated. I see 0, 12, 19. Ah, right? Okay, because 12, or you could say one of the domain, you could say the domain has repeating numbers, but some of your classmates are looking and saying, I don't see things that are repeating. So, but because 12 is paired with 2 numbers in the range. Again, it would not matter if we had 2 of these going to the same place, right? So if I had something like this, 5, 6, 7, and then 5 and 6 both went to 3, and 7 went to 4, is that a function? That's still a function. Every single one of them could go to the same place. But when one of them is going 2 places, just think if you listed the ordered pairs, you would have had 12, -9, and 12, 2. And that's why a couple of you said something in the domain is repeating, because 12 is being used twice. So you do not have to word your response exactly like mine by any means, but please explain. Don't just give the response. We didn't really have some questions like the top right choice here. Whoops. And you won't have something quite like that choice on the test. But this is looking at vertical line test is the goal that we're thinking about here. Remember, if it is a function, you want no points to be directly above one another. We don't want there to be a vertical line that would touch in more than one place. So in this case, the one that is a function would be this one. This one is called a piecewise, well, not quite piecewise function, but it would be a no because there's two closed circles on top of each other. That's why that's a no. And it's very obvious that these are no's because they have things on top of each other. So what about this? Function, not a function? Yes. How about a parabola? How about the parabola but going this way? No. Good. Okay. So on the test, it's actually worded as which one is not a function. There are 4 choices. If you prefer, you could just tell me yes or no for each of the 4 choices. But I wanted to be sure to give you a couple other examples so that you knew what to expect. But you will not have one where you have to look at the dots. That kind used to be on IXL a lot, and it's not anymore. So, and then you have some graphing questions. Some of you are happy about that. Some of you are like, dread. So you will have 2 that are in slope-intercept form, just like these first 2 are. They're not the same problems, of course, but so when we have y equals mx plus b, so if the y is by itself, then we're going to begin at b and move with the slope. So we begin on the y. So I'm starting at 3 and then down 5 and over 1. Down 5 and over 1. What if I could not go down 5 and over 1? What else could I do? Right, I could go up 5 and then go left 1. Up 5 and left 1. Notice that's the same line. So if I was very near maybe the bottom of my graph and I didn't have enough space, I could also do that. So for number 2, where will I begin? -5, yes, on the y. And then we'll go up 2 and over 3. And you don't have to make multiple dots. But if you don't, please be sure that you use a ruler so that it doesn't just look like this. So I don't want to see this kind of thing, and then suddenly it's like, craziness. And I don't want to see just this. Even if you put arrows on this, no, like extend your line. Okay, so no wimpy lines. And then the next 2 questions are in standard form, and you have a choice. I know some of you don't like choices. You just want me to tell you this is the way. You have to do it. But you do have a choice. I guess you always have choices. You have a choice. You can just use the intercepts. So if I use the intercepts, that means I allow y to be 0, which means all I have here is x is -6. So it's the one time I'm going to go on the x line except for a vertical line. And then I would want the y-intercept, which would mean the x is 0. So y is negative 6. This is the one where sometimes we have to divide, but in this case, since they're just x and y, I don't have to divide. Now, if I draw my line carefully enough, it should be the same as if I'm a little bit off there. If I put it in slope-intercept form. That is the other option. So if you want to make your graphs all in the same way, then you would want to move this into slope-intercept form. So I'm going to move the x over. Then I would be starting at negative 6 and then down 1 over 1. And notice what happens. It is actually the same line. I was just a little sloppy. So if it's in standard form and your intercepts are nice whole numbers, which they will be like these are, you can simply use your intercepts. So in this case, my x-intercept would be 8. And then I have to do a little division to get my y-intercept. Divide by negative 2. So my y-intercept is negative 4. So x equals 8. Y is negative 4. And if I wanted to move it around, I would subtract the x, divide by negative 2, and I noticed a few homework assignments that when given something like this, a few of you wrote 2x. That is not 2x. That is 1/2 x. And then also just being careful with your signs. So if I start at negative 4 on the y and went up 1 and over 2, same, up 1 over 2. If I kept going, I would also intersect the 8 on the x. So both ways we should get the same graphed line. And then number 5, in this case, this is a vertical line. If it is only x, it is vertical. So you're going to go to negative 4 on the x-axis. By the way, if you use the intercepts, you might not write down anything besides doing your graph. And that's okay. So you don't have to show it both ways. So I'm going to go to negative 4 on the x. And remember that it is not just a point, because x is, yes, negative 4 here, but it's also negative 4 all of these places and all of these places forever and ever. And if it were only a y, then we would make a horizontal line, and it would go through the y-axis. Questions about graphing? Guys feel pretty, hopefully, decent about that? Awesome. So here you're asked for the slope, the x-intercept, and the y-intercept. 2 out of 3 of these things are like, I don't need to write down a thing. Because since this equation is in slope-intercept form, as long as you remember that slope is m and y-intercept is b, this is 5, this is 2. It is not 5x. Okay, everyone hear me. It is not 5x. It's only the 5. If it were 5x, that would mean that the slope is constantly changing. That would mean that every time I change the x, I change the slope. And then the line would be doing all kinds of wacky things. So only the coefficient of the x there is the slope. So you don't need to add the x. And then the x-intercept, remember x-intercept, y is 0. So if I put a 0 in for the y, and then do the equation. You may or may not see this. This question may not have this part of it anymore, but we did this also. Divide by 5. It's not pretty. That's not unusual. So -2/5. You could give me a decimal since the decimal ends, but just that fraction is absolutely fine. So I just replace the y with a 0 and then solve to get the x by itself. But 2 out of 3 parts of that are just about knowing what that you recognize it's in slope-intercept form. In number 2, we are asked for the slope, the x-intercept, and the y-intercept. Friends, there's nothing magical about answering the questions in their order they're given. It might be easier to answer it in different order. So, we just talked about intercepts. For the x-intercept, that means the y is 0. So this is where you're just doing this. And if 3x equals 12, what is x? 4. And if 4y, so the opposite is true, the y-intercept, the x is 0. So ignore the x. 4y is 12. Divide, and it's 3. So those two, it's just making those two little equations and solving. The slope, well, there is a little bit of a shortcut, but probably for most of you, just think if I can get it in this form, right? If I can get the y by itself, then I know the slope lives next to the x. You cannot just take the 3 off the x and say it's the slope, because the y is not by itself. So if we move the x over, bring down our y's, move it over to the other side of the equal sign, that's why it becomes negative, because I subtract it to get it over there, and then divide everything by 4, and then bam, there's my slope, because this would be y is -3/4 x plus 3. But we already have our 3, but maybe you get it that way. Also, doing slope-intercept form would give you your y-intercept and give you your slope. I would not do that and then find my x-intercept. Use the original equation to find your x-intercept is much easier. If I do, I mean, I can say y equal -3/4 x plus 3, but yuck. If I can just do 12 divided by 3, that seems much easier. All right. Then we have a graph, and you're going to be asked to give the slope and the x and y intercept for the graph. So there are no dots marked on the graph. So I need, or you need, to find 2 places where it's crossing at nice, perfect corners. And in this case, the y-intercept is almost always going to be 1. And then I would find a close one. Find 2 that are close together, because if they're further apart, you have to reduce. So this is going down 1 and over 2. Remember that it's rise over run. If I chose things that are further apart, maybe someone chooses this and this. You can. Then you're going down 4 and over 8. But then to get full credit, you have to reduce that fraction and reduce it, simplify it correctly. So picking the dots closer together to find the slope will help you avoid having to reduce. And then x-intercept is just where is it crossing the x-axis? 2. Y-intercept, it's crossing the y at 1. Please don't forget that if the line is going down from left to right, like this one is, then the slope is negative, as we can see. Here you're just going to be asked to find the slope. The y-intercept, if we tried to do it with these points, would be messy, like Victoria, what you were coming up with the so I tried to change numbers, and then it gave me like I didn't think ahead far enough. So we're only doing the slope here, and remember that's where we're going to subtract the y's on top and the x's on the bottom. And you can go left to right or right to left. So the way I have it written then, I would do 2 minus 4, negative 5 minus 3. So this would be negative 2 over negative 8, and that would reduce to positive 1/4. If you went in the other order, you would have positive 2 over positive 8, and it still would reduce to positive 1/4. The y-intercept would be like then take that and find the b, but in this case that I chose bad numbers. They don't work out nicely. They don't play pretty together. So just ignore that. And then notice the top of this, and by the way, the actual test doesn't look nearly as terrible copy. This is like so spotted and everything. But anyway, the top line says I can write the equation of a line in slope-intercept form. So everything on this page, everything under this heading, I should say, everything under this heading, your final answer needs to be in this format. And there will be a number here and a number there. So for the first one, instead of finding those two numbers, this is where we convert, where we're going to move the x and then divide by the y coefficient. Yes. So I'm going to move the x over. When I move it, it becomes negative, so negative 3x plus 12. And I would encourage you to go ahead and slide it in x to the equal because we want it to be in that order. And then everyone gets divided by 2. If you can simplify, you need to. So negative 3 over 2 just stays negative 3 over 2 x, but 12 divided by 2 is 6. So notice it looks like an equation in slope-intercept form. For number 2, we are again to write an equation in slope-intercept form. I need two numbers. So I could just go ahead and say, I know I need something here, I need an x, and I need something out here. The slope, m, is 2/3. And it crosses the y-axis at 0, 4. What does it mean if it crosses the y-axis? That just means it is the y-intercept. Also, as we talked about yesterday, if there's a 0 for the x, it is the y-intercept, aka the b. So in this problem, I don't even have to work to find the b. That 4 is the b. Please do not make the assumption that you always use the y that's given, because that's not, in case, of course, true. So in the next one, now we need to find b and write the equation, which you guys had. This was one I think you did about 10 problems on, and then we did more problems with this with parallel and perpendicular. So you've had lots of practice. So this is where we write y equals mx plus b, or I do. You might have stopped writing it after you got the hang of it. And then I have 5 is equal to 3 times 2 plus b. So I put in my y, I put in my x, I put in my m. I don't know the b. multiply the m and the x. Then I need to get the b by itself. So b is -1. Am I finished? No, I still need to write the equation. So now y is equal to 3x minus 1. And if I test it, 2 times 3 is 6. 6 minus 1 is indeed 5, which is the y value. So yay. So please make sure that you actually write an equation. Don't do the hard part of finding the b and then drop the ball and not give the... Notice how all these answers look pretty similar. They're all equations in slope-intercept form on this section. So here's our word problem. And all you're asked to do is write an equation. You are not asked to actually find something. It's write an equation that you could use to find the amount an electrician charges for a house call based on the number of hours. So everything on this page has been slope-intercept form. This is no exception. So it is still an equation in slope-intercept form. So I know I'm going to have y equal something, x something. I just need to decide which one is which. So if x represents the hours, then 30 per hour, 30 is my slope. And the $70 is what the guy is charging one time. Now, sometimes people say, what about if I wrote 70 plus 30x? If you wrote 70 plus 30x, you would get the same answer, and it's an equation, but it would not be in slope-intercept form. So please put it in slope-intercept form so that it just looks like all the others. Now we're going to write an equation for the line. So we still need the slope and the y-intercept. And we still need that y equals and the x, of course. So the y-intercept is going to be the easy part. Crosses at -2. And then we need to find our slope. So for this line, what do you guys think? What's my slope? -1. Yeah, so I could just go down 1 over 1. You could give me just -1, -1 over 1. You could say -x. -2, right? All of this would be the simplest way to write it, but it's okay if you put -1 over 1. If you would write something like this, you need to reduce that, okay? Don't leave it like -3 over 3. Reduce that. So you could still leave it in a fraction or just as a whole number, but reduce. And then you do not need to worry about the table of values. In case you're curious, it is y equals 2x minus 1. Just in case you're curious of like what this would be, the equation for this table would be y equals 2x minus 1. That rule works for every line. If I double the x and subtract 1, I get the y. But we didn't practice that. That's why it says skip. It's not going to. You won't even see it on the test. And then parallel and perpendicular. What is the slope of a line that is parallel to y equals 4x plus 2? Parallel. What if it's parallel to there? What would the slope be? 4. Parallel means the slope is exactly the same. Okay, parallel, same slope. So you need to know it's the same. And then you need to know which one of these numbers is the slope. So it's 4. So in this case, it's multiple choice. It's not multiple choice anymore on the actual. You're going to have to actually come up with that. If it were perpendicular, it would be opposite and flipped. So then it would be the -1/4. So be sure you read carefully. And then these are asking us to write the equation. And your final answer, again, is going to be in slope-intercept form. So this is the one of the last things we did yesterday. So if it's parallel to this, this is just a big fancy way of telling me m is 4. So you need to identify the slope. So these are my steps. Identify the slope. Then we need to find the b. Bless you. Goodness. Good health. And write the equation. Sound like I had a little kitten in the room there. So if I know that the m is 4, now I can use my x and y that I've been given. -3 is equal to 4 times -1 plus b. 4 times -1 is -4. Add 4. That's 1. So b is 1. And then now just putting things together, 4x plus 1. You do not care anything about this guy out here. Please do not try to use him in your equation somewhere. You have to find your own b for your equation. Don't try to use that one. And then in the next one, same kind of problem, except now when we identify the slope, we got to do a little more work because it says it's perpendicular. Perpendicular, and this is this slope. So I'm going to change the sign and flip it over. So it becomes positive, and when I flip over 1/5, I get 5. I mean, you could write 5 over 1, but it's going to be easier in our equation if we just make it 5. And then we still need to do the other parts. So my y is 1. My m is 5. My x is 2. I don't know b. So 10 plus b. Take away 10. -9 would be b. So -9 is my y-intercept. So now I have my slope and I have my y-intercept. I write my equation. I use my new slope. I do not use the -1/5. I use the new slope. And then the last question is asking if these lines are parallel, perpendicular, or just intersecting. By the way, just intersecting means the same thing as neither. And that means we need to compare the slope. I don't remember if this is on there or not. Since I wrote skip on there, but that's probably from a long time ago. So the first one of them is easy. Bam. There it is. The other one, if I move the x over, divide by 2, this is my other slope. So in this case, I would say they are parallel because the slopes are the same. Or I could say the slopes are equal. Or I could say the slopes are both -3 over 2. If my second one had been 2 over 3, positive, I would have said they're perpendicular. If my other one had been -2 over 3, or -7, or -29, or anything, I would have said they're just intersecting, or they are neither perpendicular or parallel.